Hello, Laura. How are you this
I'm
evening?
good. How are you? Good to see
I'm,
you.
I'm absolutely fantastic and waving to
Good, good.
everybody that's joined us. So just to introduce myself, my name's Laura Henry-Allain and I work across the UK and on an international level in early years training consultancy. And recently I created the characters of Jojo and Gran Gran, which is actually on CBB. So I'm delighted to be here this evening sharing tips on starting school. So over to you, Laura. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Great to be hanging out with you tonight. My name's Laura as well. So you've got a double dose of Laura's this evening. I am the founder of an organisation called My Happy Mind, and we work in schools, nurseries and homes to help children build their resilience, their self-esteem, and ultimately to be their very best selves. So delighted to be here with you, this evening.
Fantastic. And what I'll do, we've got a number of questions that have already come through from parents. So we'll kick off with the questions that have already been sent to us. And for anybody who's watching this live, please feel free to add comments, to ask us any questions. We will try to answer live. If not, we will call a friend or do a 50-50. But we'll try as much within the 30 minutes we've got to answer as many questions as we can. So the first question, Laura, I'd like to put to yourself, it's going to be a bit of a tag team this evening.
Yeah.
What would you say, in terms of your expertise and personal experience, Laura, the top tips for preparing children to start school emotionally?
Yeah, great question. And I think this is something that is absolutely on all parents' minds, isn't it? Particularly for those who've got children starting school for the very first time. So the first thing I'll say is there's so much that you can do. So don't feel that, you're in this situation where you're worried about preparing them emotionally and there's nothing you can do, because you absolutely can take lots of steps. And this is actually the topic of a series of videos that we've been putting out this week. So definitely check out Ladybird Books' feed to get these in more detail. But there's kind of the 5, I guess, top areas that I would focus on here. The first is really to speak about their feelings about starting school. And even if you think your child is absolutely fine about it and they seem really excited and they seem totally okay, have that conversation about how they're feeling about it, because that's going to really help them to feel that their feelings are okay, that their feelings have been heard. And obviously then you're going to be able to process some of what they might be thinking and feeling. And there's loads of advice on how to get those feelings out in one of the tip videos that I just mentioned. The second thing is, I think, one of the things that children worry about and that can cause kind of emotional concern ahead of starting school is the kind of the fear of the unknown, right? And just not necessarily being clear on what's going to happen. So anything you can do around helping them to understand what their routine's going to be, what does their school uniform look like? What does their morning routine look like? Maybe even walking past the school and practicing the school run. All of those types of things are going to remove some of that fear of the unknown, and so take away any of that anxiety that they might feel. The third area is around explaining the why. So I think one of the things that we often miss as parents is talking about why school's so important and why we go to school in the first place. So really focusing in on all of the things that they're going to learn, all the things they'll get out of it. Related to that, I guess tip number 4 would be around getting them excited. So as well as focusing on some of the kind of the nuts and bolts things around what school's like and what they'll be doing, get them excited about all that they've got to learn. There's always great photos and resources on a school's website to help you there. And then finally, I would really say to you, look after you in all of this process as well, because I think, as mums and parents and dads and carers, we can be so tough on ourselves, and they will be okay. They will be all right. And so just make sure you're taking the time to look after you so that you're going into this experience positively too, because that will transfer onto them. So they would be my top 5 tips.
Thank you, Laura. I think they're absolutely fantastic. It's quite simple to remember because it's 5. So in terms of taking 5, and the final point, I think I I would expand on for parents in this time where we've had, since March, time at home. We've had so many things just pulled out from underneath us, having to make changes, that we have to take care of ourselves. It's the old analogy, isn't it, of the airplane mode. You have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first. And I think I would add to that, in terms of making sure that you talk to your child, you answer their questions. One of the things I always say, if a child has asked you a question, it means that they're ready to hear the answer in an age, stage and ability way. And being available and not saying, for instance, right, it's 3 o'clock, we need to have a chat about going to school. I think one of the things I always say is let it happen naturally. And I'm a firm believer, when my boys were little, we used to go on walks and chat. And even when we used to go on car journeys, that was a natural way to chat. But I think it is important emotionally that you look out for the clues, and you know your child. I always say to parents, you are your child's first teacher. So be picking up on any slight mood changes, because as much as we try to shield them from the news, what's going on, they know what's happening. They feed us from what's happening subconsciously inside of us. So I would just say to, your top tips, Laura, I think are amazing, and just be picking up what's going on for your child and answer honestly as much as possible.
Yeah, totally agree.
Fantastic. And the second question that's come in is, what can I do to support my child with soft skills, for example, reading and writing?
Yeah, again, I think this is something that we often as parents, and I can remember when both of my two started school, I kind of thought, I should be doing all this prep and I should be getting all these things in place before they start school. And again, it's an area that we can end up, I feel, putting a lot of pressure on ourselves as parents around. And I guess what I would say is there's absolutely things that you can do that you're probably already doing to encourage those kind of early literacy skills. And some of those things, for writing are just things like mark making, encouraging them to do, painting, encouraging them to use those kind of fine motor skills. So, building Lego and playing with Play-Doh and all of those things that just get their fingers moving and their fingers kind of stronger are really going to help when they go into a more structured learning environment around writing in school. And I think in terms of reading, at this stage, it's really all about getting them to just fall in love with books and fall in love with stories, and that to be an enjoyable time for them. There's plenty of time in school for them to be learning phonics and all of those things. I would say focusing on just helping them to enjoy those spaces and those special times with you at this stage is the most important thing you can do. Teachers are trained to teach these things in a way that works for children. So don't feel you have to be the teacher. Be there to be the one that engenders the excitement and encourages them to just play around with some of those basic skills we've discussed. And Ladybird Books have got so many incredible resources around this. I was having a look on their website before. They've got loads of amazing things that you can be doing if you want to do some more formal stuff. But I really do believe, and Laura, keen to hear your perspective on this from an early years practitioner perspective, that making this fun and making this enjoyable and making this about special time with you is one of the best things you can do at this stage.
Laura, I have to agree with you. I'm going to virtually high-five you. I think also too, as a parent and an educator, the best thing, make it fun, play and play with your child. Don't be worrying about, phonics, getting them to write. Leave that for the teachers. Use this time, as you said, get them involved in cooking, because cooking, that's all maths, that's all science. Reading books, go to your local library, to places of interest that are starting to open it up. Now, obviously, got to be mindful of the individual places, their own regulations around social distancing. But one of the things that I always say, even if I'm speaking to educators and parents, is to follow your child's interests. So if your child is interested in trains, find different books in terms of fictitious books, factual books around trains, like for instance Thomas the Tank Engine, that my son absolutely adored when he was little, and then factual books about different types of trains, historical, when was the first train built, different things like that. So it's about thinking about what is your child interested in and how you can support that with different activities within the home, outside of the home. And as Laura, you was just saying then about the fine motor skills, but equally to the growth motor skills. So running, jumping. If I was doing this session with parents, I'll just do a demonstration of running upwards and downwards, clockwise, anti-clockwise, because all of these different movements help your child to write. Yeah. And even if with ribbons up and down, all of these things will help them when they go to school. So the more that your child's able to be physical with their small motor skills and large motor skills, will help them when they do go to school. And the other point I wanted to add there was about supporting children with their independence. And I think we have a question along those lines as well. So for instance, if your child, getting your child to set the table, if they're playing with their toys, getting them to put things back into its place, their self-help skills, making sure that they can dress themselves, undress themselves, especially if they have to do PE in school. All of those things are absolutely going to be vital to your child, taking themselves to toilet, knowing how they know how to take care of themselves after they've been to the toilet. So the more independent you can make your child, the better. And I have this thing also too about independent in thought. So if a child asks you a question, I know I did this as well, I'm guilty as anybody else, to say, well, actually, give them the answer straight away. I think sometimes my friend, who's a parenting expert, Sue Atkins, would say, pause to ponder, and then say to your child, that's an interesting question, what do you think? Support them with their critical thinking and their thinking within that. So I think let's go on to the next question, which is another good one, because this one's come up for me when I've been speaking to parents. My child has struggled to make friends in the past. How can I help? What advice would you give there, Laura?
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking, isn't it, as a parent when that happens? I know I definitely have experienced that with both of mine. Actually, not only in starting school for the first time, but throughout their kind of school journey as well. So I guess the first thing I would say is, as hard as it is as parents to see that, this is part of their development. It is part of what they go through in learning about relationships. So whilst it's tough, relating back to something I think Laura said earlier, being honest with them about that and accepting that this is part of life is the first part of that. I think so often we run to protect them and to say, well, that's not okay, and we don't actually deal with what's going on. And actually they're incredibly good children, even at this young age, at managing some of their own emotions when they understand more about what's going on in that dynamic. But I think one of the things that's really powerful to do if you know this is a real anxiety point for your child is some role play with them. So whether you do this with little Lego figures or Barbie figures, and again, as Laura said earlier, go with their passion here. If they're really into Peppa Pig, use Peppa Pig characters, but role play through some different scenarios. Maybe you choose a scenario where two of the characters are playing really nicely, and you call out what's happening in that dynamic that's causing that to be a nice play or a good friendship. So for example, maybe Peppa Pig is sharing with George, or maybe Peppa Pig is taking turns nicely, or whatever it might be, and really calling that out and making it very clear to your child that that's being a good friend. And then likewise, play around with scenarios that perhaps haven't gone as well, and talk about the fact that that's not being a good friend and that's not okay. Because often for children, some of the time that they're struggling with friendship issues, they may be contributing to that without even realizing it, because they haven't necessarily understood the kind of the rules or the right way to approach a friendship. So I think eking some of that out through role play, as I say, using their passion is a really powerful way to do that. And I think, linked to that, just trying to get them to talk about it, try and get them to talk about what's not worked in the past and what has. But then to top and tail that, I would really suggest focusing on celebrating the times when they have had good friendships. Because what children and adults can do sometimes is really hang on to those negative experiences And that can kind of push some of those more positive experiences that they've had around friendship to the back of their mind. So if you see them playing really nicely with a sibling or a friend or someone else in their circle, really make a big deal out of that. Really bring their attention to the fact that they do have those skills to be a good friend, and they are a good friend, to build that kind of self-esteem up. But just keep the conversation going and keep talking about it.
Yeah, I agree with you again, Laura. I think this was a destiny. We've both got the same name, and you know, we're on the same tune here. And I think just to add there, for some children, I've also too written a piece to go onto the Ladybird website, and this was one of the things that I talked about. That's some children haven't been back to a form of daycare, be it a nursery, preschool, childminder, since March. So for them now, it's starting again. And for some children, they may be the only child in their daycare centre going to that particular school. And going back to my point previously, it's about being honest with your child, role playing, as you said, finding out with them. And I think really important here is to, if you as a parent have got any worries about your child making friends, if, you know, somebody called them a mean name, anything like that, if they've got the right things in their lunchbox, please speak to your child's teacher even before. And I know from myself, coming from a teaching background, we welcome that from parents. We want parents to be honest with us and to tell us any worries that they have or their child has, because it could be that the teacher says to you, well, actually, no, within, you know, playtime, we do notice that Mohammed or Billy or Jane, they do have some friends. And, you know, sometimes children see things differently. And your class, the teacher will actually monitor that as well. And I think have those conversations with your child about how they're feeling those children, because for some children, especially I know, Laura, in the work that you do, a small thing can become a big thing and create a whole level of anxiety that comes out in different ways for a child. So I think it's anchoring that and supporting your child.
Definitely, and it's really interesting. We've just been running over lockdown some special courses for parents, and one of the ones we've done is with year sixers, right? So year sixers who have missed that transition stage up into secondary school, and they too have this concern, like, what if I don't make friends? And I've struggled with that before. And as adults, if you start a new job, you often think the same thing. What if I don't meet anyone that's nice? I think one of the things that I often say to my students and the parents that I coach is, it's really powerful to give children their own evidence. So by playing back to a child that they do have the skills to have friendships and have positive relationships, give them their own evidence that they've done that before, as opposed to just saying to them, of course you'll make friends, it will be fine. You can say things like, of course you'll make friends. Do you remember when we went to the park and you started playing with that little girl? You had a great time and you were brilliant at establishing that friendship. So by giving them their own evidence that they have these skills, you really build that self-esteem up, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's a fantastic advice there for the parents listening. And I think another question linked into that, Laura, is around independence. So if a child is attached to their parent, especially within this period of lockdown, how can we encourage parents to make their child to be more independent, especially with the move on to school?
Yeah, so I guess you're getting at kind of separation anxiety there, and that, again, really heartbreaking moment for us. And I certainly went through this intensely with my firstborn when we started school, in terms of that separation anxiety. And I think, again, you know, the first thing to acknowledge is it's there, it's very normal. Lots of parents and children will go through separation anxiety, so you're definitely not alone. And I think, you know, from a parent perspective, one of the things that's just super important is just to be talking about that, you know, whether that's with your partner or your friends, because you're definitely not the only person feeling like that. And I think, you know, sometimes that sense of feeling alone and feeling worried is you know, going to add to your anxiety. So definitely talk about that and look after you in that process. I think in terms of your child, one of the things, as I mentioned right at the beginning, is this sense of the unknown and this sense of what's going to happen when I start school. As Laura said, you know, particularly against the backdrop of what we've all experienced over the last number of months, which has been this new routine. You know, all of a sudden we go to shops and everyone's got masks on. You know, we shouldn't underestimate how scary these things and how daunting these things can be for our little ones. So a couple of things that I think are really helpful with separation anxiety is, one, making sure that your child is really clear on the routine and that they totally and utterly understand and believe that you will come back at the end of the day. You know, I think one of the things that my son used to say to me a lot was, but what if you don't come for me at the end of the day? And it was this feeling and this fear of, I'm never going to see you again. And so again, talking through the routine of the school day, role playing that, you know, mapping out the different stages. And you can even draw little picture cards for each of the stages. So for example, we get dressed in the morning, then we have our breakfast, then we do the school run, then you have a fun time in the morning at school, then you have lunch, then you have more fun in the afternoon, then I will pick you up. And just really reiterating that routine so that they're building kind of a mental map of what's going to happen is going to help with that. The next thing is, after you've been through those first days, and even if they are tough at the separation point, reminding them at the end of the day, talking about all of the positive things in their day and reminding them that just like you said, you came back. And that will be the same the next day, and so on and so forth. And then the final strategy that I really like to recommend to parents is creating a really positive ritual around that separation point. So whether that is, you know, as you are on the way to school, maybe you drive to school, you put on their favorite audiobook in the car and you have 3 hugs in the car and a big kiss, and then you go in, or whatever your ritual might be. But getting your children familiar with a pattern and a routine can really help them to learn what to expect and to kind of feel better about that separation moment, which can be challenging.
Some fantastic advice there, because I know from speaking to some nurseries and preschools, this was a couple of questions that had come through as well on that same said theme. But I think to add to that, Laura, I think it's about then being curious what may be going on underlining for your child. And as you so rightly say, getting them into a routine, and between now and the start date of school, if your child hasn't left your side since March, maybe having some short periods of time away. So it could be that you leave them with a relative or a friend who they're familiar with, and then you say, I'm going to the post office, I'm going to the shop, I'll be back in 10 minutes. And then you make sure that you're back. And then the next time I'm going to the supermarket, I'll be back in an hour. And I think it's in, because we sometimes, I think, I know that myself as a parent, we underestimate what our children do know and understand. But making sure that you do come back on time. So therefore, then it's like a weaning in process for that return back to school. So they do know that you are going to come back, and they do know, they get used to you being away from them in a healthy way, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. So just a couple of more questions. We do have so many questions, but these are the ones that I think are, quite important around special educational needs, Laura, and what do we need to be thinking about for parents who have a child with special educational needs? And personally, this is quite dear to my heart because my son's autistic, and I feel it really is important that we do have some inclusion where we do have a focus on children with special educational needs and what it may be like for them starting school.
Absolutely agree, and it's something very close to my heart as well. I have some personal experience of that too, and I think it's super important to raise it and have the conversation. I mean, I think one of the things that I would say is that all of the things we've already talked about and the tips that we're sharing this week and the stuff that's on the Ladybird website, Laura's written articles, I've written articles there as well, is all still going to apply, right? So it's not a case of saying it's different advice, but I think there's things we can layer on top that are going to really help those children who do have some extra needs and extra support requirements to really thrive. And I like to talk about the 3 R's when I talk about this. I think the first thing is more emphasis on routines. So one of the things that really comes up for a lot of children who do have those additional needs is needing to know that routine, particularly with children on the spectrum. This kind of sense of change and structure and routine becomes even more pronounced than perhaps those children who don't. So I think really focusing on routines, and we've got some good strategies on the tip videos on how you can do that, is super important. I think the second thing that becomes even more pronounced is rehearsing. So all of the things we've already talked about, as Laura said, rehearsing that separation anxiety moment, whether that's leaving them with a grandparent or whoever else it might be, but really putting extra effort into rehearsing those critical moments and those critical conversations becomes really important. And then the third R is around reassurance. And this really is about for your child, but also for you. So children who have special educational needs do need often more reassurance and more of that kind of emotional support to help them through transitions like this. And I also think parents, and Laura and I both have experience of this, also need that too. So surrounding yourself with other parents and other children and other support networks where this is something that people are dealing with is really, really helpful. You know, I'm always a bit nervous about recommending certain groups because I think these things are very much a personal preference. Some people will prefer talking it through one-to-one. Others will get, you know, real comfort from reading books or reading articles. But the key thing is reassurance for you as a parent that it will be okay and that there is support in schools and that teachers know what they're doing, but also reassuring your child as well and focusing on those routines and rehearsing what's to come would be where I would focus.
Absolutely, and I think all of that in terms of laying it up, and again, my point in speaking to your child's teacher and letting them be in a way, and I always come from a point of a child-centered approach. So thinking positively, what do people admire about my child? What's important to my child? And how can the school actually support my child within that? And like you're rightly saying about the routine and visually, and again, because you are your child's first teacher, explaining to your child in an age, stage and ability way, and making sure that the school, not just your class teacher, any other supporting staff in the school that work within, you know, the assistants, etc., teaching assistants, teaching support, that they're fully aware of your child's needs and how to support them within the school on a day-to-day basis.
I totally agree. And I think this is why I talk about a layering approach rather than an either or approach with children who've got additional needs, because I actually think many of the things that do support children with additional needs support all children. So, you know, don't be afraid, as Laura said earlier, to go into school and talk to the teachers and say, these are the things that maybe really trigger my child, or these are the things that make them upset. And this is a really good way to soothe them. You know, teachers want that information. They want that relationship with you, because not only is that going to help the child, but it helps them as well, doesn't it, in the classroom if they've got these different strategies that they know work. So don't be afraid to have those conversations. I know it's daunting when you just getting into school for the first time, particularly if this is your firstborn going through school, but genuinely teachers welcome that input and feedback from you, so don't be afraid to share it.
And I think just a couple of sentences on that with me is that even though your child's school have dealt with children with a variety of special needs, additional needs, it really is important that they see your child as a unique child, because my son is autistic, but every single autistic child is different.
Yeah,
that's why I said about that child-centered approach and making sure they are aware of your child's individual needs. But the final question, I mean, we can go on and on because there's so many questions here, but the other thing, and I will say this at the end as well to anybody listening live or afterwards, both Laura and I are here. We're available across the socials, so please, this is, you know, the beginning of conversations that will happen right until into the autumn term. But the question is around bullying, which I know a lot of parents think about, you know, especially things that they hear about in the media. So I suppose to frame the question is, how would a parent prepare them in case their child got bullied on both sides? So if their child was the one that may be being bullied, or on the opposite end of being bullied, what would be your advice there, Laura?
Yeah, and again, a really tough thing to go through as a parent and as a child, of course, and to be worrying about this at such an early stage. You know, when we're kind of letting our little ones go into school for the first time, it's really, really tough for parents. I think, you know, the thing that I would say with this is, you know, focus on what you can control. So, you know, within your sphere of influence as a parent is educating your child on being a good friend, on how to treat other people, on how to be respectful of other people. And within your sphere of control is helping your child to understand what they can do in the school environment if somebody is being unkind to them. So as Laura said earlier, talking to the teacher, building that sense that it's okay to talk about things that happen and it's okay to talk to the teacher. But also recognizing that as parents, there's many, many things that we worry about. that probably will never come to fruition. And we all love our little ones so dearly, don't we? They're the most precious things in our lives. And it's really easy for us to go to all of the negative things or the bad things that might happen. And we've just got to be really careful about our own internal narrative on some of those things, because they may well not happen. So all you really can control on that is, one, trying to focus on the positives of school, trying to get your child excited about school. Two, making sure that you're doing your bit in helping them to understand how to be a good friend, how to treat people with respect. And then three, making sure they understand what the channels are. Obviously within the home, they know they can talk to you, but within the school, what they can do if they do feel that someone's treating them inappropriately. And I guess the final thing I would say as parents, again, is, you know, this is what teachers are brilliant at. They are watching and learning and looking out for these behaviours in children, and they will feed back to you if your child is perhaps, you know, got some areas of opportunity in terms of how they're playing. But also, if you've got concerns, you need to be flagging those early on so the teachers can be onto it. But this is what teachers are brilliant at. I always say teachers have got eyes in the back of their heads, and they will pick up on it. So focus on what you can control with your child, and try not to worry about it too much.
Yeah, and I think just to layer that, the phrase that we've used this evening, I would say all of what Laura's saying, and equally too, as you said earlier, Laura, about the role play in there. I think that's quite important. So allow your child to take part in conflict resolution. What would they do? So asking open-ended questions within that. What would you do if that person called this person a name, this child, etc.? What does that mean to you? Who would you go and tell? And I think, again, as I know teachers, I do a lot of work with schools and nurseries and preschools around helping children to self-regulate their behaviour. And I think this time, so all the teachers have had professional development, they're thinking about this. And I know within my education community about supporting children with their personal, social and emotional development, especially returning back now after the pandemic that we're in, and they will have tips to support your child either or, and they will know that some children will walk into school and settle in just like that. Other children, they may have some difficulties, and teachers are, they're curious, they'll be able to pick things up without the drop of the hat. And going back to my other point, if your child comes home and shares something with you and you're not happy about it, please go and speak to your class, your son or your daughter's teacher, because that's what they're there for. And they always will thank you for alerting them. And then the teacher will take that back and use role play within the classroom. They will use different books. There's a wide range of activities that they will do. And every school actually has an anti-bullying policy as well. But I think what I would say on that is try not to worry so much on the negatives, because we're all like that. Even I do. I was worrying about this live Instagram this evening. Try to push that at the back of your head and just focus on all the lovely positive things on your child's next step in their lives. So Laura, final point from you.
Just thank you guys so much for joining. It's going to be great. They're going to be okay. You're doing an amazing job as parents and carers. I know how much, as I've said a couple of times, guilt we can put on ourselves. Just focus on taking positive action. That's the best thing you can be doing. If you want to learn more about what we do at My Happy Mind, you can come and follow me. It's just at My Happy Mind. We give away a ton of free resources all of the time to parents to help with these types of issues and other things as well. So come and check us out there. And look out for the tips videos over on the Ladybird Books feed that will be coming. We've got 2 more to come, so check those out as well, because they go into a lot more detail than we've been able to tonight on some of the key issues we've talked about. But thanks for hanging out. It's been great to spend time with you.
And thank you again, Laura, for your wonderful advice that you're given. For me, I'm across the socials, Laura Henry Consultancy, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. And I also too have these conversation cards on Starting School. I think the colleagues will put the link up there where to get them from. And just to reiterate what Laura said, you do an amazing job. Think back to the beginning of March when we went into lockdown, and abruptly and overnight we've all had to adapt. So please just keep on being your wonderful selves. And if you do have any more questions, because this is just a short window, please come back to us. Either put the questions through to Ladybird or to Laura and ourselves, and we will definitely answer your questions or signpost you to different organisations, etc. So final point for me, thank you so much again for joining in the chat, giving up your Wednesday evening. Look out for the resources or the wonderful video clips that Laura has been busy recording over the last few weeks or so. Look out on the Ladybirds website for the starting schools activities for your little ones, and check out Ladybird's starting schools highlight on Instagram as well. I feel like a newsreader because I'm looking at these things to read. But thank you all so much. Thank you, Ladybird, for inviting us, and hope that we can have different subjects as we go through the year on different topics, because I've quite enjoyed this. So just be safe and careful out there, everybody, and thank you very much.
Take care, everyone.
Bye. Bye. Bye.